Welcome back to Apex Sci-Fi. Today we tackle the final frontier of human persistence, the mastery of the Chronal Sea. In the vast complexity of the cosmos, travel between the stars is not a simple matter of moving fast. It is a matter of cheating. To cross the light years, you must step out of the three dimensions we know and into the void between, better known as hyperspace. To most species, this is a necessary evil, a terrifying, non-linear dimension where time and space do not follow the rules of the road. But for the Zilthal Empire, hyperspace was their fortress. They had developed a long-jump drive that allowed their entire fleet to stay in hyperspace for weeks at a time, moving through the galaxy like ghosts. They were untouchable. You cannot hit what is not in your reality. The problem with hyperspace isn't the physics, it's the biology. When a biological mind enters a dimension where time is a suggestion and space is a fluid, the brain suffers from what is known as chronal nausea. For most advanced species like the Zilthal, their brains are masterpieces of neural architecture. They process data with absolute precision. Their sense of time is perfect down to the millisecond. But in hyperspace, that precision becomes a death trap. Their brains try to process the nonlinear echoes of the void, seeing their own past, their own future, and three different versions of the present all at once. The result is a catastrophic neural feedback loop. The Zilthal call it the sea of disordered time. To survive a jump, their crews must be placed in deep stasis or heavily sedated. A Zilthal ship in transit is a ship of sleepers, guided by automated AI that doesn't have a soul to lose. When the Zilthal Ghost Fleet began its march toward the human-allied worlds of the Pleiades, the galaxy braced for impact. The fleet would simply drop out of hyperspace directly above the target planets, glass the surface, and jump back into the void before a single defensive shot could be fired. No one had ever successfully boarded a ship in hyperspace. No one had ever even seen one. The physics said it was impossible to anchor two objects in a dimension of shifting variables. The biology said even if you could, you would be a gibbering madman the moment you stepped through the airlock. The high command of the Allied systems was ready to surrender. But then they sent the signal to the mercenaries of Sol. Captain Elias Thorne stood on the bridge of the Harpooner, a ship that looked more like a jagged piece of space debris than a tactical boarding craft. Beside him, Sarah Touch Miller was adjusting the tension on a massive, reinforced chronal cable, and Big Mike Henderson was checking the seals on his combat suit. They weren't preparing for stasis. They were drinking lukewarm coffee. The Allied Admiral, a crystalline being whose internal light was flickering with anxiety, stared at the humans. You intend to intercept them, mid-jump? Do you not understand? The chronal pressure at the center of a jump vortex is enough to shatter a mind into 1,000 pieces. Even our most powerful computers struggle to maintain a sense of now in the void. You will be dead, or worse, you will be lost in your own memories before you even touch their hull. Thorne took a slow sip of his coffee and looked at the Admiral. See, that's where you're wrong, Sparky. You think our brains are precision instruments like yours. But human brains? They're a mess. We've spent millions of years living in a world where time is subjective anyway. We wait in line at the DMV and an hour feels like a century. We have a good time at a bar and 5 hours feels like 5 minutes. Our internal clocks are already broken. To a human, time isn't a line, it's a vibe. We're not going to try to process the void. We're just going to ignore it. The Harpooner ignited its drive, following the massive chronal wake of the Zilthal flagship. As they hit the jump point, the universe turned inside out. The stars didn't stretch, they dissolved into a screaming vortex of violet and neon blue light. The walls of the ship seemed to become transparent, showing the team the infinite, swirling nothingness of the void. To an alien, this was the moment of total mental collapse. Sarah Miller felt a sudden, sharp pang of nausea. She saw a version of herself from 5 years ago sitting in the chair next to her, and for a second, the coffee in her hand tasted like a birthday cake she hadn't eaten yet. She shook her head and blinked. A little dizzy today, she muttered, her voice sounding like it was coming from a mile away. Big Mike Henderson looked out at the shifting reality and shrugged. Reminds me of that one summer in Amsterdam, he grunted. Just keep your eyes on the cable, Sarah. Don't look at the pretty colors. The human mercenaries were suffering from chronal nausea, yes. But to a human, the symptoms felt remarkably like a bad case of motion sickness or a lingering hangover. We are the descendants of the persistence hunters who chased prey across boiling savannas until we were hallucinating from heatstroke. We are the species that invented the roller coaster for fun. Our brains have a built-in filter for chaos. We have a unique ability to tell ourselves that what we are seeing isn't real, allowing the lizard brain to keep the body moving while the higher consciousness is screaming in the corner. Target locked, Thorne called out, his hands moving over controls that were flickering in and out of existence. Sarah, fire the harpoons. Two massive, tungsten-tipped spears, trailing glowing cables of liquid chronal stabilizer, shot out from the harpooner. In the void, the spears didn't travel in a straight line. They looped and twisted through the distorted space, guided by a human-designed dumb logic system that didn't care about the physics of the jump. The harpoons slammed into the Zilthal flagship. The impact vibrated through the harpooner, a heavy rhythmic thud that stayed consistent even as the visual world fell apart. "We're hitched," Mike roared, grabbing his heavy kinetic rifle. "Let's go for a ride." The humans didn't wait for an airlock. They stepped out onto the hull of the alien flagship while it was moving at 1,000,000 times the speed of light through a dimension of pure madness. They were magnetized to the hull, the violet energy of the void washing over them like a psychic storm. To any Zilthal observer they would have looked like demons walking through the heart of a star. They used an industrial thermal lance to cut through the hull. As the air hissed out of the breach, the humans dropped into the ship. The interior of the Zilthal flagship was a scene of total defeat. The alien crew wasn't in stasis. They had been kept awake by an emergency alarm, and now they were paying the price. Dozens of Zilthal soldiers lay on the floor, their four eyes rolling in their sockets, their bodies twitching in rhythmic spasms as their brains tried to reconcile the chronal echoes. They were alive, but their minds were miles away, trapped in loops of their own memories. One Zilthal officer managed to stagger to his feet. He looked at the humans, these three-dimensional solid creatures who were walking calmly through a ship that was currently a four-dimensional nightmare. To the officer, the humans were lagging. He saw three versions of Captain Thorne. One stepping forward, one standing still, and one from 10 seconds ago. The officer wheezed, his voice distorted by the time dilation. Thorne didn't even try to talk back. He knew that in this part of the ship, sound was traveling at different speeds. He just stepped forward and delivered a heavy, physical punch to the alien's jaw. The blow landed with the weight of a species that didn't care what time it was. "Clear the corridor," Thorne signaled with hand signs. Real-time communication was useless here. They moved toward the primary chronal core. The core was the heart of the ship, a massive rotating sphere of liquid time that kept the fleet in the void. As they got closer, the distortions became even more extreme. Sarah Miller saw her own hands turn into those of an old woman, then back to a child's. Big Mike felt his heart beat once every 10 minutes and then 10 times a second. It was a sensory apocalypse. But the humans had a secret weapon, the soul sync. Every mercenary wore a small vibrating device against their skin. It didn't use a clock, it used the steady physical pulse of a human heart recorded on Earth. It was a rhythmic anchor, a constant reminder to their nervous systems of what real time felt like. They reached the core. The Zilthal guards here were the elite, protected by neural dampeners. They were standing, but they were slow. To a human, the aliens looked like they were moving through molasses. The aliens' high-precision brains were so busy filtering out the chronal noise that their reaction times had dropped to nearly zero. Thorne and his team moved like lightning. They didn't use lasers. They used dumb bombs, simple old-fashioned C4 explosives with mechanical timers. The chronal energy of the core couldn't interfere with a physical spring and a chemical trigger. Sarah Miller planted the final charge. She looked at the rotating sphere of the core and felt a sudden, intense wave of vertigo. For a second she was back on Earth, 6 years old, falling off a bike. She felt the scrape on her knee and smelled the summer grass. "Sarah." Thorne's voice broke through the memory, anchored by the vibration of her soul sync. "Focus. We're moving." She snapped back to the present. The charges were set. They turned and ran back toward the breach, their boots clanking on the metal floor. They didn't look at the walls. They didn't look at the colors. They looked only at the tether, the physical glowing wire that led back to their ship. They leaped through the breach and back into the harpooner. Thorne slammed the docking hatch shut. "Cut the tether. Now." The cables snapped. The harpooner fired its reverse thrusters, falling out of the flagship's wake. Seconds later, the mechanical timers on the C4 reached zero. In the vacuum of hyperspace there is no sound. But there is a ripple. The C4 exploded, not with fire, but with a sudden violent injection of real space matter into the chronal core. The reaction was catastrophic. The liquid time inside the core flash vaporized. The Zilthal flagship didn't blow up. It snapped. The bubble of hyperspace surrounding the fleet collapsed instantly. One moment they were moving through the violet void. The next they were violently thrust back into the 3 dimensions of real space. The snapback was the final blow. The Zilthal crew, already mentally shattered by the jump, were hit by a sudden return to linear time that was like hitting a brick wall at the speed of light. Every alien on the fleet was rendered unconscious or worse. The Ghost Fleet was no longer a threat. It was a collection of drifting, silent hulks, sitting ducks for the waiting human defense monitors. The harpooner dropped out of hyperspace miles away. The bridge was a mess of flickering lights and scorched panels, but the three humans were alive. Thorne leaned back in his chair, his eyes bloodshot, his head pounding with a migraine that felt like a jackhammer. He reached for his cold coffee and took a long, shaky swallow. "I hate jumping," he muttered. "I really, really hate jumping." Sarah Miller was leaning over a trash can, her face a pale shade of green. "If you ever suggest a mid-jump boarding again, Cap, I'm joining the Navy. At least their ships stay in 1 century at a time." The Zilthal Empire surrendered within 48 hours. Their invincible fleet had been taken down by 3 humans and a few sticks of dynamite. The psychological shock was even greater than the military loss. They couldn't understand how a species could enter the sea of disordered time and not only survive but conduct a complex sabotage mission. The Galactic Council's new entry on Chronal Resilience was a masterclass in HFY biology. Advisory: do not assume that the psychological or neurological hazards of hyperspace apply to humans. While other species possess highly ordered neural structures that are prone to chronal feedback, humans possess a chaotic, adaptive consciousness. They are the only species that can perceive nonlinear time and simply choose to ignore it. They are chronally numb. In a jump vortex, the humans are the only ones who stay awake. If they hitch a ride on your ship, you will not know they are there until the core is already gone. Humanity had proven the ultimate mercenary HFY truth. The universe can twist, turn, and fold as much as it wants. It can break the laws of time and the rules of space. But a human with a job to do and a heart that beats in real time will always find a way to the finish line. We are the hitchhikers of the void. We are the ones who don't get lost. And if you think you're safe in the dark between the stars, just listen for the sound of a harpoon hitting your hull. This has been Apex Sci-Fi. Hold on tight. The ride's not over. If you enjoyed this mid-jump victory of the Mercenaries of Soul, hit that like button. Comment below. If you were trapped in a time loop, what is the one song you'd want playing in the background? Subscribe for the next contract, the brain lock. The jump is over. The check is in the mail.